All right, so this is the teaching on the Ruach haKodesh, or on the Spirit, part 2. And we're going to begin here with a quick overview of what we covered yesterday in part 1, just in case any of you don't remember or were not here. The key to yesterday's teaching was that we covered the, and I don't want to get into all of the stuff that we did with comparing Exodus 19 and Acts chapter 2, but we're just going to go on to the part that had to do with the Spirit. And in the understanding of the Spirit, what we came to understand is that in the Scriptures, it's the word in the Greek and in the Hebrew is often translated for wind, for breeze, for breath, for exhalation, okay? It's also often translated as our essence or our intrinsic nature or the indispensable quality of something, okay? So, in other words, it has to do with our attitude, our character. So when we see something like someone having the spirit of jealousy, we read about that in part 1. Well, their intrinsic nature at that point was jealous. It defined who they were. Okay? They weren't just jealous for a moment. They were now jealous as a person. It was a character distinction. This is really important. You know, I remember dealing with somebody a long time ago, and I said to them, "Oh, you're driving me crazy." And the person then thought, "Oh, you think I'm they thought I meant that as a defining characteristic." You see, and what I meant was, no, right at this moment, you're driving me crazy. Or you may say to somebody, "Stop that, that's annoying." Now, that doesn't mean that the person who says it thinks you're just an annoying person as a characteristic. It means you might just at that moment have been doing something that was irritating them, right? This spirit, though, is meaning it's a defining characteristic. This is who you are. When you have the spirit of jealousy, that's who you are. You are jealousy right that moment. When you have the spirit of anger, you are anger at that moment. When you have the spirit of lust, you are lust. This is now who you are. That's why it's such a problem. It's your intrinsic nature. So hopefully this is making some sense. It's not just a momentary thing. It's now become a defining thing. You've become defined by this thing. It has consumed you to the point where it now dominates your attitude and personality. Your thinking, your decisions are now dominated by this thing that's jealousy, anger, lust, whatever it is. By the way, it can be good. You can be filled with shalom. And what dominates is peace and shalom. You can be filled with joy. You can be filled with integrity. You see, it's not always bad. But it's which choice do you make as far as, let me say it again. It depends on which one you choose to embrace as your intrinsic nature. And we're going to get into that quite a bit here in this part 2. But let's understand that that's the biggest piece of this, is because, yes, we know that one of the definitions is wind and it breathes and all this other, so it's like the air blowing and that kind of thing. And we're told, by the way, with the Nicodemus conversation, that those who are born again are like the wind and go to and fro. And those that are in the kingdom, that are not given, they go like the angel, they just go to and fro like the wind. So we're given analogies, but I want us to talk about this intrinsic nature, because I think that's the key to what we're all trying to understand. Okay? Call it a mental disposition, call it an attitude. It's all a part of that same understanding. And remember, at the end of part 1, I did say that there are 3 major influential spirits, or we'll call it mindsets, or intrinsic natures. There's a spirit in man, there's a spirit of Hasatan, and then there's the Ruach haKodesh, the Holy Spirit. And as we mentioned in part 1, this is the spirit of Elohim, although the phrase Ruach haKodesh does not appear anywhere in the Tanakh. You do see it appear in the Brit Hadashah, where it says the Holy Spirit. So if it was in Hebrew, it would have said Ruach haKodesh, but it just doesn't appear in the Tanakh, because it uses other ways to make the point without using that particular phrase. Okay? Now, let's go to Genesis chapter 2, and we're going to begin part 2 right here. In Genesis chapter 2, in verse 7, it says, "And Yahweh Elohim formed the man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and the man became a living being." A living being. Okay, so we got a lot going on right here in the beginning. Okay? So first of all, it says that he breathed into his nostrils. The word there is nafach, and that means to puff, or literally to inflate. Okay, so he did actually breathe into his nostrils, but what did he breathe in? The breath of life. And that's the word neshama. And you hear, if you ever listen to the Orthodox teach an awful lot about the neshama of man. And the neshama of man, it actually has the idea of being the vital breath or divine inspiration or intellect. It also can be defined as wind or a puff, but in this case it's the puff or the wind of life. So the vital piece was breathed into us. And I believe it's at that moment that also a piece or connecting point of the Ruach of Elohim was breathed into you. Because that's the connecting point that he uses to communicate with us, to call us out of our sin, to be that small voice that's supposed to be, that still small voice. That's our connecting point, is that he breathed into us. That's what makes us different than the animals. Okay, the animals were breathed in and became a nefesh, because that's the rest of the verse says, and man became a living being, or a creature that breathes, that lives. Well, so do cats and dogs and fish and birds and bugs and all that kind of stuff. And the word nefesh is used for all of them. I said that also in part 1. But we are a different type of nefesh, a different type of soul or being. And by the way, we know that it says that the nefesh or soul that sins shall die. So there's no immortality in this idea of a nefesh. A nefesh being that we breathe and we live, but we can also die. But we have something unique. We had breathed into us this spark, this different element that allows us the intellect, and that's one of the definitions of neshama, is divine inspiration and intellect. The divine intellect, we have a little piece of that in us. And I believe that this is where man receives that vital spark and is given the ability to choose and make decisions. That's what makes us so different. Most of the other creatures on the planet do everything by instinct. Okay, it's built into them where to fly, where to swim, where to eat, what to do, how to function. Nobody has to teach them to do anything. They just do what they were designed to do. No instruction necessary. Us, if we got no instruction, we'd still be laying there in the swaddling clothes just like, right? We need to be instructed. And we need to then be given choices. And then we need to make decisions. I did a teaching, very important teaching called Making Decisions, the Reason You Exist. The reason we exist is to make decisions. And this, as a part of that whole process, is that he gave us the spark that gave us the ability and the desire to choose. And so this is where, although the Ruach is not mentioned in this verse, I think this is where it all begins. He breathed into us that spark which connects that spirit and gives us that intellect or divine intellect piece so that we can actually have an ability to develop that intrinsic nature. It gives us the ability. See, a dog cannot develop the intrinsic nature. The cat cannot, the fish, the bird. Okay, I don't care what you like about your pet. I'm sorry to insult you, but it's never going to develop the intrinsic nature of the Creator. Okay, it's still whatever it is. Your pet, whatever, okay? That doesn't mean you don't have to, worry about loving it as much as you do. We are supposed to care for things, and it's okay to do that. But realize it will never develop the intrinsic nature of our Creator, but you can. As a matter of fact, that was the whole point. Okay? When it says in chapter 1, in verse 27, it says, Elohim created man in his image. He created man in his image. So we were created to be in his image. That was the intent there. It's not just he created man in his image, okay, so we look physically like him. He said man was created with the purpose of being the express image of the creator of the universe. But only one being has actually accomplished that, and that's Yeshua, who was the express image of the Father. Because he was completely 100% filled with that intrinsic nature. And so that's where we need to be then focused on. Can we start to understand that we have a nature that we're striving against? That's the intrinsic nature of man, the spirit of man. We've got the cheerleader of that which we shouldn't do called Hasatan, who's always encouraging us to do what we shouldn't do. Usually it's because he's trying to encourage us to do what we really want to do that we shouldn't do. And saying, yeah, that's okay, you should do that. You want to, it's good for you, do it, And so we're trying to compare these natures. So understand that I believe Genesis 2 and verse 7 is where that spark was breathed into us, the breath of life, this difference that's in us. He doesn't say that earlier on in chapter 1 when he created the animals and the birds and the fish and the bugs and everything else. There's no mention of that. He just created them and they were living nefesh. They were living beings. Okay? But in our case, there's this extra step. He breathed into us this ability to become like him by choice. However, we can choose to go the other way. Let's look at Job. Job chapter 15 and verse 12. Okay, Job chapter 15 and in verse 12. Okay. In Job 15 and in verse 12. So it says here, what have you taken to heart, and why do your eyes flash? That you should turn your intrinsic nature against El. You should turn your spirit against El, and let such words go out of your mouth. So you can turn your spirit against him. So I like when we plug things in, okay? Let's plug in the Christianity talk. He says here that you should turn your existentially outside, internal, some sort of weird spirit being against El. Does that make any sense? See, we've been taught always that everything about the spirit is some sort of literally existing outside entities, that these are actual entities. I'm not saying there aren't entities, but this is not talking about an entity. This is talking about turning your intrinsic nature against the Creator. He says, doesn't that plug in better? Doesn't that make more sense? Because you can put in here the wind, okay, why do you turn your breath against El? Why do you turn the breeze against El? Why? Plug all the other definitions in, they don't work. The divine spark, your divine intellect, why do you turn your nature, your understanding, the spirit in man, why do you turn that against El? Let's go to Genesis chapter 6. With that understanding, go to Genesis 6 and verse 1. It came to be, and I don't want to talk about the sons of man and the daughters and the things and the Nephilim. Let's skip through that, but understand there's a point here. It came to be when men began to increase on the face of the earth and daughters were born to them, okay, that all this other stuff happened over here. And in verse 3, look what happens. He says that the sons of Elohim came to the daughters of men and they were good and they took wives and all this stuff. And then this is what happened. Verse 3. Yahweh said, my spirit shall not strive with man's spirit or with man forever in going astray. He is flesh and his days shall be 120. And we'll skip down to verse 5. And Yahweh saw the wickedness of man. Wickedness, by the way, is defined generally by you do what you want to do that goes against what he wants you to do. Because after all, you're not going to do anything you don't want to do. And so you do what you want to do, knowing that it's not what he said to do. Because you didn't want to do what he wanted to do. He says, so he saw the wickedness or the self-sovereign, self-driven, self-spirited man, the wickedness was great on the earth, and that every inclination of the thoughts of his heart was only on evil continually. That's it. The inclination, the intrinsic nature of man was on evil continually. Evil is not defined just as they were raping, pillaging, murdering, and doing all that other stuff, and stealing. No, evil means breaking any commandment, doing anything that goes against the order that was put into the universe by the Creator. The universe is designed to function in Torah. And so when you do anything that goes against the design, it's called evil. And it says that in many places where you can see that evil is not limited to raping, pillaging, murdering, and all that other stuff, although that stuff is obviously evil. So I'm not diminishing that, but realize it's not limited to that. If you break the Sabbath, it's evil. You eat pork, it's evil. All those things that go against what Yahweh said is defined scripturally as evil. Let's continue. So just so we can see that here, he had said, how long is my spirit going to do battle with and strive with man, because man doesn't want to do what I want him to do, what I created him to do. He says in verse 6, he goes, I'm sorry I made them. Because they're broken. You ever buy something or try to build something and like you buy a kit and you put it together and it just doesn't work? You go, this is broken. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. Well, that's what Yahweh did when he looked down at us. He said, you guys are broken. I did not make you to do this. You are not functioning as designed. He said, I'm sorry I made you. He was grieved in his heart. Why? Because the spirit in man was not submitting to the spirit of Elohim. The intrinsic nature of man was not submitting to the intrinsic nature of Elohim. The intrinsic nature of man is me, I. That's our intrinsic nature. That is generally where we function. Me, I. I don't like it. I want to do this. Why can't I do that? That's not fair, but I like to do that. Oh, but I hate that. That's the intrinsic nature of man. And Elohim says, shh, be quiet. Listen to me. That way doesn't work. I didn't make you to work that way. I didn't make you to function that way. I know what works. Listen to me. After all, I designed the whole system. I designed you and the world you live in and everything. Shh. By the way, as a parent, you know you've had these conversations with your children. Because your children end up in disaster after disaster. You keep saying to them, why won't you just listen to me? And they're like, because it goes against my nature. I just want to do what I want to do. And you know what? Some of us are 40, 50, and 60, and we haven't changed. We just feel more entitled to do that. Because we have this intrinsic nature, the me, I, and that's the old man has got to get buried. Bury that me, I person. And start walking and embracing his intrinsic nature. That was the whole point of the filling of the Spirit, is that you would be immersed in his intrinsic nature. Because we're already completely filled in our own. Shameful. But this is, we're going to dig to the real problem here, aren't we? This is really where the rubber meets the road. This is where you have to look in the mirror and realize the problem is you. Don't blame everybody else. Okay, let's look at the spirit of Hasatan versus the spirit of Elohim. 1 John chapter 4, and we're going to realize we can't blame Hasatan either. Because he's just an opportunist, he's not the problem. Christianity has lied to you. Okay, Hasatan is absolutely 1,000,000% not the problem. The problem is you let him get in there encouraging you to do things you shouldn't do. You give him opportunity, he's an opportunist. I've proven this to you guys thousands of times, all right? I'll use a very simple example of the alcoholic. If you're an alcoholic or dealt with alcoholism, I'm not picking on you, I'm just making a point. As an alcoholic, you can't even have one drink. Why? Because you are susceptible in that area to your problem called alcoholism. If you've never had that intrinsic problem in your nature, because you have other problems, everybody has the problems, it's just a matter of different ones. Hasatan will never tempt you to drink if you don't have that problem. Okay? However, he'll tempt you if you do have the problem. If you've never had a problem with lusts of the flesh and pornography and that kind of stuff, then you're never going to be tempted and he's not going to work on you saying, ooh, go to that website and go do this and go do that. He's not going to do that to you. Why? Because it won't work. It's not a stumbling block for you. You see what I'm saying? Anger. I know a lot of people that seem like they never get angry. So Hasatan's never going to keep trying to push their buttons to get them angry. But the person who has an anger issue, he's going to give them opportunities all the time to pop their cork. His job, not that he understands his job. Hasatan thinks he's just trying to take over, do whatever he's trying to do. Abba uses him as the baptism of fire guy to test you to see where you're at. He allows him to mess with you to see how far you've come. But he can only mess with you in areas where you have a predisposition. Does that make any sense? Okay? If you've never had a greediness problem, he's never going to tempt you to go out there and have wealth abundance and just be greedy. If you never had a selfishness problem, he's not going to tempt you about that. Wherever your problems are, he's going to try to encourage you to walk in that area. And that's why we have such a problem judging people, because we look at the person over there and we go, oh, I don't understand why they have that problem. Of course you don't. You don't have that problem. But guess what? They don't understand why you have your problem, because they don't have your problem. And that's why we have such trouble having empathy for each other. We tend to empathize with people that have the same problems as us. And then we have a little pity parties and we're all going, oh, I'm miserable doing this. And sound like I'm miserable in the same area and I'm miserable. And just, And then the person goes in, another person jumps in who has no problem with all that stuff, goes, what's wrong with you people? What is that? Stop. Well, but you don't understand. And the other person's like, yeah, you don't understand. And like, you're right, I don't understand. Because I don't have that problem. So then we can have empathy and say, even though I don't have that problem, I can empathize because I know what I feel like when I struggle with my problem. So I can empathize with them when they struggle with their problem. It doesn't matter if it's not my problem. But let's look at haSatan here a little bit. 1 John chapter 4. Beloved ones, do not believe every spirit. Remember I told you there's at least 3 usually in your head trying to get your attention. Yours, haSatan's, and the Father's. You know, I'm not saying that you're all schizophrenic and that you're like hearing voices, but there are 3 voices in your head. You have that lot of self-talk. We talk, and beat ourselves up and say, oh, you can't do that, or why are you trying that? Oh, don't you know people are going to laugh at you, and blah, whatever, right? Self-talk is the biggest thing going on always in your head. But then there's the enemy who loves to go and encourage you going, yeah. You know, somebody says something to you, it's the enemy that wants to help filter that and say, oh, you're going to let them get away with that? You should be offended by that. Can you believe that they did? That's haSatan encouraging you because you have a weakness in that area. And if both those voices would ever just shut up, there's a still small voice trying to say, hello, I know the way that works. I know the path to joy and happiness and blessing and safety and shalom. But you got to get the other 2 to be quiet. So what do you have to do? He says, don't believe every spirit, but prove the spirits, whether they are of Elohim, because many false prophets have gone into the world. Now look, let's start off with the first half of that verse. Do not believe every intrinsic nature. In other words, don't believe that every spirit or every attitude is of Elohim. He says, but test it to see if it actually is in line with his intrinsic nature. So when a spirit is trying to say it's okay, and I've talked to people like this who say, oh, well, I had a confirmation from the spirit that I could eat pork. Really? That goes against his intrinsic nature, wrong spirit. So when it says prove the spirits, how do you do it? You hold it up against his intrinsic nature. What is his nature? I am Yahweh, I change not. He's righteous when there is no other righteous. That means he always does what is right. So that means that if he's ever said something is wrong, it's always wrong. If he ever said something's right, it's always right. So now he can't be telling you it's okay to do something he already told you was wrong. So you can't say that he, and somehow it's congruent with his nature, and his intrinsic nature would tell you it's okay now to break a commandment or keep a pagan holy day or do whatever else that's against that would be impossible. That's against his nature. How do you know what his nature is? He gives you a book, tells you everything about his nature. Isn't that convenient? How nice. He gave us a whole book telling you what his nature is. He says, prove the spirits whether they are of Elohim. Why? Because there are false prophets out there lying to you, claiming they're doing stuff in a spirit's name, or in the spirit's name, because they're claiming it's the spirit that's leading them. Well, it's certainly a spirit leading them. Could be their own, could be haSatan's, could be anything. He says, by this you know the spirit of Elohim. Every spirit, every intrinsic nature that can confess that Yeshua is Messiah and that he's come in the flesh is of Elohim. But every spirit that does not confess that Yeshua Messiah has come in the flesh is not of Elohim. And this is the spirit of the anti-Messiah, which you have heard is coming, and by the way, now is already in the world, even back then. Because it's the intrinsic nature going against Mashiach. The intrinsic nature going against by the way, what is Messiah? Torah, truth, light, life. Right? So the anti-Messiah nature, or the spirit of anti-Messiah, is the intrinsic nature against truth, Torah, light, Messiah, all of that. Oh, but we think the spirit, the anti-Messiah spirit is actually some sort of being or entity. It's an attitude. It's an approach. It's a nature. Now, it's being encouraged by an entity called haSatan. But it in itself is not an entity. It's a mindset. It says this mindset of anti-Messiah, anti-Messiah mindset already is in the world and has always been in the world. That mindset is being encouraged all the time by the adversary or the accuser of the brethren. He encourages that mindset. And what does Abba want to know? He wants to know, have you purged that mindset yet? He inspired Rav Shaul, the Apostle Paul, to say, let this mind be in you, Philippians 2:5, that was in Messiah Yeshua, but then get that other junk out of there. Trying to be polite. All kinds of other things. I want to get stronger with this. Get that stuff out of there. And that three-letter word screws everybody up. You have to actually let the mind be in you. You have to let it, which means you can stop it. You can prevent the whole plan yourself, at least for you. You can just decide, I'm not going to let it. And sadly, a lot of people do. But he says here, look, you are of Elohim, little children, and have overcome them, because he who is in you is greater than he who is in the world. They are of the world, therefore they speak as of the world, and the world hears them. He says, we are of Elohim, and the one knowing Elohim hears us. Okay, so we are of Elohim. I claim to be of Elohim. If you see his nature in me, and if you have his nature in you, you'll recognize it, then you know I'm of Elohim. You know, sometimes you people have asked, well, how do we know if we have an anointed, appointed teacher? Well, look for the intrinsic nature of Elohim in your teacher and make sure you have it in you so that they can recognize each other and there's a congruence there. You know, let's say you were raised and grew up in another country. Doesn't matter what country it is, okay? And that country had a very different culture and history than this country. And you're here living in this country, and all of a sudden, someone walks in the room from your country where you came from. All of a sudden, there's something about your spirit and their spirit are going to connect because you have commonalities of history and commonalities of culture. There's going to be something that resonates between you that attracts you naturally into a comfortable place. And when you go someplace to visit, like some of us have traveled, and when you travel to another country, sometimes you're very uncomfortable because you don't fit in. There's nothing familiar culturally, historically. The spirit is different. Not that it's bad. We're not going to get into spiritual entity. But I mean, the intrinsic nature of where these people come from is completely different. Because they went through a whole different history than you did. And so what's appropriate where you live may not be appropriate at all where they live. Matter of fact, I remember when I was first starting to keep feasts, and I was in the Worldwide Church of God, and they would actually tell us, if you're going to an international site, be aware of certain customs and traditions because you may accidentally offend somebody in those places. You know, in some places, it's very, very rude to put out your right hand, to shake hands, because that's the hand you use when you go to the restroom. I'm serious. I'm not trying to be vulgar. And so so shaking hands. As Americans, you know why we do it? Because it shows you don't have a gun or a knife in it. That's where the tradition came from. You offered your empty hand to someone saying, hey, I'm not here to fight you. I don't have a knife or a gun. Different culture, totally different meaning. Just offering a hand. And so you say, I don't even know what to do here then. I don't want to step wrong. So there's no congruence there. Guess what? You come out of the world, you come out of the churches, you come into this, and you're like a fish out of water. You don't know what to do because you have not yet allowed the intrinsic nature of Elohim to grow and develop in you so that you can get comfortable with all this. Some people will walk in here, see the Hebraic liturgy, and fall in love and tears. Others will walk in here going, ugh, what's that? This doesn't resonate with me at all. This is completely uncomfortable. I'm out of here. Because of their intrinsic nature. Was not ready or compatible with the culture and the place of that. Does that make any sense? Because I've had people walk into the very first service in any kind of a Messianic congregation and have to walk out in tears because it was so overwhelming, the joy they were feeling, because their whole being resonated with everything. This happened in Knoxville with a friend of ours. Came to the service and just absolutely fell apart in a good way. Because what was inside of him connected. HaSatan doesn't want us to make those connections. HaSatan doesn't want us to have that experience. Okay? But he says, we are of Elohim. The one knowing Elohim hears us. He who is not of Elohim does not hear us. By this we know the spirit of truth and the spirit of delusion. So now we're getting a comparison There's two spirits. Again, they're not additional. We're going to find out that the Ruach haKodesh is the spirit of truth. And the spirit of man, and especially the spirit of Hasatan, is the spirit of delusion. So there's two major ones battling here. Hasatan's nature and Elohim's nature. The spirit of truth from Elohim, the spirit of delusion from Hasatan. Let's continue in 1 Timothy. But realize the first admonition that we just read in John was, don't believe every spirit. 1 Timothy. I mean, if I had $1 for every person that contacted me telling me, oh, the Spirit told me this, and the Spirit told me to tell you that, and I had this vision, and I had and you can't believe the crazy stuff some of these people think came right from the Ruach. Okay? And I have to then now respond to that stuff, and I'm like, did you prove the spirits? You did? No, listen, I had an emotional experience, so it must be true. I'm telling you, that's what people do. I had an emotional experience, so it must be true. But I promise you, every person that ever became a Hare Krishna or a Hindu, when it wasn't born these things, who changed to these things, or a Buddhist or a Christian if they were in the world, did it because of an emotional experience. Okay? That validated their choice. So don't say it must be Elohim. Really? Because everybody that's been in every cult, every religion that didn't start out born in it. That's the key here. Because if you were born in it, you were just doing it because you were born in it. But anybody that ever changed to a different religion or started one that they never had one, made those decisions because they had an emotional experience. So stop validating everything with an emotional experience. Oh, but you don't understand. When I do this and when I do that, something that they used to do in the church, they validated based on some emotional experience they had. But everybody can validate with emotional experiences. Just go ask anybody that left and whatever you knew them to be doing, and now they're doing something else. Whether they went to Islam, whether they went to Hindu, whether they went to Buddhist, whether they went to, it doesn't matter whatever they went to. They had some sort of an emotional experience. Either they were very emotionally beat down and battered, and then had an emotional experience where somebody actually offered them solutions, offered them peace of some sort. And so that pulled them in their emotional weakness, because somebody offered them an emotional answer. All your emotional stuff can be solved. Come with me. We'll heal everything. So let's stop validating our stuff based on emotion. You should be only getting emotional in response to everything already being valid. But don't use the emotion as the validation. Okay? I get emotional because of how I feel, yes, but I'm not going to tell you it's because I'm emotional that it proves that I'm right or that I'm in the right place. Emotion doesn't prove anything. Is that fair? Okay, I'm not attacking emotion. I'm just saying it proves nothing. So don't use it as proof. Where did I say to go? 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 1. But the Spirit distinctly says that in the latter times some shall fall away from the belief. So where do you see the Spirit saying any of this stuff? I don't see the Spirit saying anything anywhere. But the intrinsic nature of Elohim inspired people to speak. Okay, but you don't see the Spirit actually speaking anywhere. So understand that when it says the Spirit distinctly said, it's not an entity actually saying anything. There's the divine inspiration being given to prophets and others, or maybe there was the Elohim spoke and they heard the voice, but it's not the Spirit speaking, but it's speaking through someone. Spirit may have spoken to that one. Moses heard Yahweh speak. Okay? But then we're hearing Moses speak. We're reading what Moses said, the Spirit said to him. Does that make any sense? Just be clear. Because everybody loves to think the Spirit's speaking to them. Listen, the Spirit didn't speak to a whole lot of people. Grab your book, count how many people the Spirit actually spoke to. Not a whole lot. Okay? Very small percentage of people that ever existed on this planet had the Spirit speak to them. That doesn't mean you're not guided, influenced, and inspired, but I'm saying actually speak to them. Okay? But I know you all know personally at least a dozen people that think the Spirit speaks to them. At least. Okay? Probably get emails from them every week. But it says the Spirit is saying, inspirationally saying through others in the latter times that some shall fall away from the belief, paying attention to what? To misleading spirits and teachings of demons. Okay, so now we're told by the truth that there will be those who are going to mislead us, that are going to, in the latter times, cause people to fall away from belief because they're going to pay attention to these misleading intrinsic natures, mindsets, misleading attitudes. And so we're going to get people saying, oh, don't do that where you are. The answer is over here. Come over here. We've got the real stuff. It's a lot easier. You don't have to do all that Torah stuff and everything. All you got to do is make an altar call. Bang. You know, money's just going to come out of your belly button. Okay? Whatever it is, you're going to get people trying to pull you because they're allowing these other spirits to lead. These are teachings of demons. Okay, now again, the demons, let's kind of work on that just for a second. And I was going to do a teaching separate on this, but maybe we'll just talk about it now. I want you to understand what I will call and define as a spiritual parasite. Okay? Some of you may have studied how things work in our body physically. Okay? Things called parasites. Okay? In other words, you may have learned about things like candida and other things that could be in your gut that feed on sugars. Okay? And so these parasites live in you, and when we feed them what they want, they flourish and grow. Guess what they also do? They take over your mind. Oh, Rabbi, you're completely lost it now. No, they're the ones that are craving the ice cream at midnight, not you. They're the ones that are craving the cheese doodles. They're the ones that are craving. You're not the one necessarily craving these things, because if you purge them out, you wouldn't actually want them anymore. I'm not kidding. If you actually go through a fasting process, cut all that junk out of your diet, you will get to a point where you no longer desire it. Why did the desire go away? Do you still not like those things? Of course you still like those things. But the little critters that were screaming for it are no longer influencing your brain. Okay? I know you hate to think that way, but this is the reality. That stuff is living in you, is the stuff that makes you want that stuff in that strong, I have to have it, I'm craving. Craving is what I'm talking about, not liking. I like chocolate, I like ice cream just like anybody else. But the people who start to, when you get those cravings, I've got to have it. I just need a piece of cake. I need a cookie. I need something, right? That craving is really not you. It's the stuff in you that feeds on that. All those things that are in you that live in our gut that love and feed on that junk that we eat. Now, I said all of that to let you know there are spiritual parasites. There are demons or spiritual parasites that feed on anger. And oh boy, when you're angry, they just come and just leech on you and hang around going, oh yeah, that's great stuff. Keep being angry. Oh, they're just eating it up like it's food. That's like life source to them. And then there are other ones that feed on your lusts. Oh yeah, that's great stuff. There are other ones that feed on your depression. Oh yeah, stay depressed. Oh, we love that. It's the emotional state that they feed on. And so they're going to encourage you through what it says here, teachings of demons, which mislead you away from the truth so that you spend your life stuck in these terrible emotional spaces. I don't know if that makes any sense to anybody, but I'm hoping you're listening. So when you want to worry about demons, demons are not possessing you like in the movies and taking you and controlling you like an automaton and making you do stuff. Oh no. They're finding the stuff you already like to do, and those are the different demons latch on you than latch on me, because we have different problems. And so when I'm walking around and let's say I walk around in anger and you walk around in depression, well, you got different demons that love to feed on depression, and I got ones that love to feed on anger. And they're going to keep encouraging you to stay in that state because that's what they feed on. And they want you to stay in that place. And guess what? When you go and change your intrinsic nature and that casts them out, they're not happy. Because you change your intrinsic nature, they're gone. Because there's nothing to feed on. But they don't control you. That's Hollywood. Okay? That's Hollywood. Now, we see metaphors of that with Yeshua casting demons out, and we can get into that at some point. But just understand, from this point of view, it's that you are embracing an intrinsic nature that these parasites feed on. You need to break free of that nature. Change your nature, and they will go. Because they got no food. You starve them out. If you fast for extended periods of time, the parasites in your body leave. So you don't need to do things to take certain herbs to kill them. By the way, you don't want to do that because now you have dead things in your body. It's not good for you. What you want to do is take terrain modify and change your environment so they leave. And then you get them out of your body through your normal movements. because they don't want to be there anymore. There's no food. Now, they don't know there's no place that they're going where there's going to be food either, but they just leave because there's nothing to eat anymore. Starve them out. That's why fasting is really part of the fasting thing is so important, because in fasting, you are now depriving the parasites of food. And when you spiritually fast, when you're doing fasting and you're focusing just on Yahweh for a period of time, guess what? The spiritual parasites have nothing to eat. And they've got no choice but to leave. Is this making any sense? Okay? And so it's very important we understand we don't need to go to those intervention ministries, or what do they call them? Deliverance ministries. I promise you, everyone I've ever seen caused more problems than they helped. Absolutely guaranteed. More entities, because what they do is they get you into all these emotional places, have you dredge up all your emotional junk, and they all come into a feeding frenzy on you. It's just, but yet, I've got people say, well, you know, my wife and I, we have this deliverance ministry and we're helping. No, you're not. Where do you see that anywhere in Scripture? Show me a deliverance ministry in Scripture. There's no deliverance ministry. And show me where anybody who dealt with a demon in Scripture ever said, repeat after me. Because all deliverance ministry make you say stuff. You got to say this stuff. Really? Yeshua said, get out. Okay. He cast out. He didn't tell the person with the demon to say anything. Did he? No. He said, hey, out. So I don't see these deliverance ministries doing that. Oh, you have to say this prayer and you got to do this thing and you got to confess in front of everybody. I've heard deliverance ministries get people in front of whole groups of congregations, confess their darkest behaviors in front of everybody. So now everybody knows every dumb, stupid, embarrassing thing that person ever did. This helps? How? How does that help? No, change your intrinsic nature into a congruence or alignment with Him. That's the whole transforming. When you transform into His image, what you're doing is you're bringing your whole intrinsic nature into complete congruence with His nature. We're aligning ourselves with Him in the way we think, in the way we act, in the way we react to things, in our emotions. We are aligning with Him. We are bothered by what bothers Him. We're made joyful by what makes Him joyful. We are aligning with Him. The intrinsic nature. Back in 1 Timothy. Okay, so in verse 2 it says, speaking lies and hypocrisy having been branded on their own conscience. So what happens is these entities who are encouraging you in your bad behavior, and we've read that with the stories of like Pharaoh and stuff where Abba allowed him or hardened his heart. Even the Creator can harden and encourage you in someone's, going in the way they really want to go. Because after all, he hadn't finished making his point. He was trying to make a point with Egypt. So he said, Pharaoh, I'm going to encourage you to keep going in the direction you want to go because I'm not done making my point. So I know you're panicked right now and you want to let everybody go, but really you don't want to let everybody go. Well, guess what? The same thing with your nature. When you go and you do something, okay, whatever it is that's breaking a commandment, guess what? You really wanted to do it. Generally speaking, you don't break a commandment because you didn't want to do it. You break it because the thing you did, you really wanted to do more than you wanted to obey at that moment. Not as an intrinsic nature yet, but if you do it enough, it sears your conscience, and then it becomes your intrinsic nature. You see in verse 2. If you habitually, remember we talked about destinies being formed, we start out with thoughts. Thoughts end up having emotions attached to them. Those emotions then manifest with the thought together in action. The actions over time form a habit. Habits form a destiny. Well, guess what? If you're going to habitually develop these actions that change your whole nature to that nature, you're basically searing your conscience. Because to do when you already know better, to do what you shouldn't do, your conscience is going to keep yelling at you unless you sear it so it shuts up. Now you become numb or seared to that thought process, and now you've convinced yourself, this is really the problem with Christianity, that doing wrong is okay. Because after all, that stuff was seared away. That was done away with. It's okay to do all those things because after all, we've already decided that we don't want to have our conscience bother us anymore. And so he says, look, be careful because they're speaking lies in hypocrisy. And so then we're branding onto our own consciences. All right? So let's be careful. Matthew chapter 10. Matthew chapter 10. See, I told you this was going to be an easy teaching. Matthew chapter 10. Look, we've been lied to. And we've been lied to by demons and spirits who are encouraging us that the lie is the truth and the truth is a lie. But only specifically in the areas that make us ultimately get what we really want. Because I want to be allowed to do. Have you ever not heard anybody rationalize to you? Where they try to rationalize something, where they rationalize and they say, oh, but Abba knows, and he knows my heart, and it's okay, and he understands my situation, and so therefore it's okay to break this commandment. Right? Have you not heard that? Okay. You're going to hear a lot of people talk about that right now when they're going to go to graduations on Shabbat, they're going to go to weddings on Shabbat, and they're going to rationalize and spin somehow that was okay. Well, it wasn't okay, but they're going to do it anyway. And then they're going to try to convince you that they were right too. They're going to do that when they have to stop and eat on the way to services. I've had people do that to us. Oh, well, we have a long distance and our kids get hungry, so make them a sandwich. You don't have to stop at the restaurant on the way just because it's a 3-hour drive. You know, for $5 you could buy a cooler. Okay? Not a giant thing. I mean, like a small cooler is only a few bucks. And stick a few sandwiches in it and some ice. That'll be fine. Oh, no, you don't understand. I do understand. You don't understand. You don't understand that you're allowing you to get in the way of him. You don't understand. You can't handle the truth. Because you can't. Because you're still sitting there, some of you going, oh, well, yeah, I know, I heard what he said, but I'm still not wrong in what I just did, and I don't care what he said. And really? You can go on justifying all you want. You better be right. I hope you're right. Because if you're not right, he's going to say, I'm sorry, but you were wrong. You were justifying and spinning it for yourself. I'd rather be on the conservative side. Matthew chapter 10 and verse 19. Matthew chapter 10 and verse 19. But when they deliver you up, do not worry about how or what you should speak, for it shall be given to you in that hour what you shall speak. For it is not you who speak, but the Spirit of your Father speaking in you. Now let's understand how this can be in two different ways. Number one, he's saying to who? He's saying to his followers, his disciples, those who he's training. And what is he training them in? Changing their intrinsic nature to his nature, right? Isn't that essentially what the discipleship process is? So he's saying, look, if your nature has changed, then you're going to be given in that hour what to speak, because it is not going to be you who speaks, but the intrinsic nature of the Father that's going to speak. You're going to allow what you already know and how you've already changed out of that abundance to be brought to remembrance by the Ruach to speak. That's one understanding. The second understanding is that it would be an instant direct download. But even an instant direct download is not happening unless you're actually congruent in that nature. Hopefully you understand. It'd be like, for example, I know that some of us are old enough, a lot of people are not who might be listening, but you know, you get your old radios that you had to tune in. Remember that? Well, guess what? If you were trying to tune in something that was on 100.3 and what you were trying to dial into was like 94.5, you're not going to get what's on 100.3. It's not anywhere near 94.5. It's a completely different part of the dial. And so no matter how much you fiddle around in the 90s, you're never going to get what's on 100.3. And you're going to be frustrated going, how come it won't tune in? Well, because you're all in the wrong place. The signal's not in congruence. The place you're trying to receive is not receiving the signal that's being sent. It's being sent at 100.3 as far as the frequency of the sound wave, and you're over here trying to receive it in the 90s. Well, guess what? If your intrinsic nature is completely not in line with his nature, you're not getting direct downloads. So don't tell me how this Christian person who's eating pork, doing Sunday, and all Christmas Easter and everything else gave you has some anointing special thing that you need to know about. He's not getting that direct download from the Creator. That's not happening. He's not congruent with him. He's completely in the 90s when the Abba's in the hundreds. And don't tell me, oh, but my friend and my this and my sister and my brother, but what are they doing? Oh, they go to the Baptist church or the Pentecostal church or this church or that church, and they do all this. So he's not, don't listen to that person. Or test that information and bring it over, because, I don't know, a donkey spoke to Balaam. So maybe that could be, but then you bring it to leadership and you test it. You test it. He says, so don't worry about it. He says, for it's not for you to speak, but it's the Spirit of your Father speaking in you. Okay, now it says speaking in you. Okay, so it's speaking through you, in you, that way. So what are we trying to say here? He says, if you can get yourself congruent and you come into that vertical alignment and you resonating in the same resonance with the Father, that, hey, you don't have to worry about anything. It'll just flow. The Ruach, the Spirit, which we will read about at some point, it says one of its roles is to bring to remembrance, to stir up in your mind what you already have put in there. Because after all, if you're already vertically aligned, if you're already congruent in your intrinsic nature, it's in there. So, for example, if you are trained in Torah and someone comes to you, you're really well-versed, let's say, in kashrut. If you're really well-versed in kashrut, someone comes and asks you a kashrut question, it's a no-brainer. It just flows out of you, right? After all, you understand the kosher laws. It flows out. But when you were brand new and didn't know, you didn't know what to say. You didn't know how to answer the question because, after all, it was brand new to you. So what are you going to say? But as you become congruent with Him and your nature changes, nature doesn't just change because you have information. In walking out the information, your nature changes. Action over time is going to change your nature because of the habits that you are adjusting and changing, the new habits you're developing and the old habits that you're breaking. Verse 21, and brother shall deliver brother to death, and father his child, and the children shall rise up against parents and shall put them to death. And you shall be hated by all for my name's sake, but he who shall have endured to the end shall be saved. So this whole thing is saying, look, that nature is still striving against man's nature, just like Abba said in Genesis, look, I'm not going to strive with man forever. I'm going to give him 120 years, that's it, boom. If he can't figure this out in 120 years, then that's it, he's dead. I'm not going to struggle and fight about it. Okay, this should be a no-brainer and easy. Either you're going to realize that I'm right and everybody else is wrong and come and get on my side, or you're going to die. That's it. You want to be right, you want to do it your way, that's okay. Enjoy life as best you can, because when it's over, it's over. Okay, so the eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die, that may work for some of you. Okay, because that's all. If this is all you're counting on and this is all you're looking forward to, you might as well just go do whatever you want, I suppose. But most of you will realize that in doing all of that, there's no true joy in it. There's no true joy in that. You know what? When you're doing things right, you don't wake up the next morning with regrets. You don't wake up the next morning with a hangover. You don't wake up the next morning wondering what you did and who you did it with. Oh, but you were having fun. Right. And now you've got an STD, or somebody's pregnant, or you now have some track marks from drugs, or somebody got hurt, or you wrecked the car. What did you do? You don't even know but I was having fun. Really? When you do things that are truly fun, like celebrate a feast, you go home feeling good. You wake up the next morning feeling good. Everything that's going on leaves you feeling good. No regrets, no guilt, no negative thoughts. John chapter 8. Now remember, we read here in Matthew, it says, it's not you who speaks, but your Father speaking in you. Now take that idea and go to John chapter 8. And I thought we'd get a lot further than this. No surprise, I guess. John chapter 8 and verse 37. See, but that's because I count on, and this isn't saying anything that's, I'm so great. No, I count on coming up here and the Ruach just leading, and it's the words coming out that way. I don't have notes for this. I have just a list of some verses. Because I count on that intrinsic nature of everything I stuck in here, that if I could just get out of the way, He'll have the right stuff come out. And that's why I really don't know how long the teaching is going to go. That's the hardest thing for me to figure out. I don't know how many parts something's going to be, because what I think is going to take one part can take three. Things I think will take three will take one. Just depends on how much he ends up wanting to say. John chapter 8, verse 37. See where that is here. Okay. I know that you are the seed of Abraham, but you seek to kill me because my word has no place in you. This is Yeshua speaking to those around him. He says, I speak what I've seen with my father, and you do what you have heard from your father. Now he's comparing their fathers. Of course, they answered him and said, excuse me, Abraham is our father. And Yeshua said to them, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the things with the same intrinsic nature as Abraham. You would do the works of Abraham. In other words, if you were his children, what defines children? Not bloodline, not genealogy, it's the intrinsic nature. If you have Abba's intrinsic nature, you're a child of the living Elohim. In other words, if you have his spirit in you, that defines you as his child. He said, if you were Abraham's, you would have Abraham's spirit. You'd have his nature. Abraham wouldn't behave like you guys. That's what he's saying. He's saying, excuse me, Abraham wouldn't be doing the stuff that you're doing. So you claim to be Abraham's child. But now you seek to kill me, a man who has spoken to you the truth, which I've heard from Elohim. Abraham did not do so. See? He said, if you're saying you're Abraham's child, well, Abraham would never behave like this. He said, you do the works of your father. Then they said to him, we were not born of whoring. We have one father, Elohim. Yeshua said to them, if Elohim were your father, you'd have his nature. Right? He's saying, if Elohim were your father, you would love me, for I came forth from Elohim, and I am here. In other words, your nature would resonate with my nature because my nature is his nature. And you know why a lot of people walk out of here? Because their nature is not ready to resonate with what comes from this microphone, which is simply coming out of this book. So I'm not saying they're not ready to resonate with me. Then the word is resonating into this room. The power of that word is resonating in this room, and that's going and smacking right up against your nature. And if it's not congruent, you have two choices. Either change or leave, because you can't sit in that place. It's too uncomfortable. I tell people all the time, don't worry about so-and-so. They'll either change or they'll leave, because this teaching will have to either change you or you'll have to leave, because it will become way too uncomfortable to be that out of sync with what's going on in this room. So you wonder sometimes why people leave. They leave because they could not be in the same place because their nature was so different. By the way, that's why you can't go back to your church. Because when you walk in there, it doesn't feel like it ever felt before. You're like, wow, why does it feel so bizarre? Because your nature is so different now. Your nature can no longer resonate in there the way it used to. They didn't change, you did, intrinsically. And so now your essence and the way you vibrate and that whole resonance that you have that's in line with the Father walks into a place where that isn't happening and you feel very uncomfortable. And it doesn't even matter if they haven't said anything yet. So it's not even like they said something that made you uncomfortable. You can just feel it in the room. You don't fit in anymore. Because you're no longer the same person. You're a different person. So he says here, look, if Elohim were your father, you would love me, for I came forth from Elohim, and I'm here. For I have not come of myself, but he sent me. Why do you not know what I say? Because you are unable to hear my word. He says, look, you can't hear it because your intrinsic nature is creating a deafness, an inability to understand. There's a blockage, filters. Okay? If we want the pure, unadulterated word, we've got to get the filters out. You know what filters? Hasatan puts a filter, and we put our own filters. And those are the things that spin what we read and what we understand to our best advantage that makes it to be what we want it to be. That makes it be how we want it to be. He says, you're not able to hear me because you're so completely intrinsically in the place you're in. You've already convinced yourself that I can't possibly be true. And so that's why you're now trying to kill me, because it totally threatens your whole delusional world. Now let's understand, any intrinsic nature that's not Abba's intrinsic nature is a delusional world. In other words, delusion has the idea of being a sense that this is reality when it's not right. In other words, it's a wrong understanding of what's really going on. A false or misunderstood reality. That's delusion. Delusion doesn't mean you need to be in a rubber room and a jacket and all that kind of stuff. It means you are not correctly processing what is really happening around you. Okay? That's delusion. So when your intrinsic nature is so Like, have you ever gone to a party with somebody who really didn't want to go? They already convinced themselves they were going to have a lousy time and it was going to be the worst thing possible. And when they get there, all they're doing is whining and complaining no matter what. It was a great party, right? You ever do that? Or you ever go there yourself and you walk away going, man, that was the worst party. And everybody else said, wow, that was great. We had a great time. No, you couldn't see that because your whole intrinsic nature was so that you could only filter through what your actual nature was at that moment. So you can only see through the glasses of your nature. And so you can't see all the things of Elohim until you get your nature to be of Elohim. Wow. I didn't think of that until just now. Isn't that a powerful thought? You really want to know the things of Elohim? You need to change your nature to Elohim because there's stuff that you'll never receive and can't receive until you change your nature. So you hit those walls where you feel like I'm not getting anywhere. Well, maybe it's because you haven't changed that much of your nature beyond that point. You can only grow up to the point that you've changed to be like him. And you do change, especially in the beginning. We have some rapid change that we make. And so we feel like this great, then all of a sudden we hit a wall. Feel this great progress and bang. Because that's as far as you were willing to go. I'm willing to go, and you draw the line in the sand. You don't do it consciously necessarily. Okay? Because, hey, Torah is great until all of a sudden, something you really like, you all of a sudden find out you can't have it anymore. Or you can't do it anymore. Now all of a sudden it's not so great. Now you start having issues. He says, why do you not know what I say? Because you're unable to hear my word. He says, you are of your father, the devil. And the desires of your father you wish to do. He was a murderer from the beginning, and he has not stood in truth, because there's no truth in him. When he speaks the lie, he speaks of his own, for he is a liar and the father of it. So what is he saying? He's saying, look, the devil's intrinsic nature is liar. But not just liar, pants on fire, whatever. It's liar, but I'm going to try to convince you it's truth. So it's not just lie, just to lie. He wants to do everything possible to convince you it's truth. But there's no truth in him. Yeshua says there is no truth in him. Okay, he's not stood in the truth. He's a murderer from the beginning. And when he speaks the lie, he speaks of his own, for he's a liar. But he's not just speaking a lie. He wants to convince you that it's the truth. And by the way, that's also the spirit in man. You want to convince you that the way you see the world is the truth too. And everybody around you, you are always most comfortable around people that are most like you. Excuse me. That's just the truth. Salesmen are taught to match and mirror and mimic you so that you can be comfortable with them so they can sell to you. So in other words, if you come into my store or if I'm coming into your place to sell you something and I find that I'm talking like this doesn't match with, because you kind of talk more, hey, you know, I'm quieter and just talk more slowly. Guess what I'm going to do if I want to make the sale? I'm going to say, hi, how are you doing today? And just talk quieter and softer. I'm going to match you because you're going to be totally uncomfortable if I'm going to be speaking at 50,000 miles a minute and you don't. You understand? And if you're quiet and I'm loud. Now, if you're loud, I'll be loud. We're going to be great. If you're fast, I'll be fast. Because the truth is we're most comfortable with people that are like us. When you meet somebody and you go home, you may tell to your spouse or your friend, boy, I really liked so-and-so I just met today. They're just like me. They do this and they do that. We love people that are like us. And we'd love the whole world to be exactly like us. I promise you nothing could be worse. That would be the worst disaster ever. Okay? A whole world full of you. Or me. Whatever. You know what I'm saying? And you would hate it too. But the thing of the matter is, he says here, look, he says, you're of your father, the devil, who's a liar. So when he says you're of your father, the devil, what is he saying? He says your intrinsic nature is to try to bend and mold the world so that the truth is really not the truth. You want this lie that you want to believe to be true. So just like your father, the devil, you've tried to convince yourself and others. And by the way, the first thing that most people do when they start to get excited about something that they know is not right, somewhere deep down, is to try to go around and convince everybody in the congregation to buy into their interpretation of whatever it is, because they will feel much better if everybody else says that it's okay too. Because deep down they already know it's not okay. But that's why they go around and sneak off on the side and try to get everybody into whatever that little side thing they're into is, because they want to be sure that they're not out on that limb by themselves. After all, if everybody does it, it must be true. Really? Not going to work really in the real world. Okay, not in Yahweh's world. It does not work that way. You want to go with the majority? Well, the majority don't believe in Torah. We already know that can't be right. We know it's accurate that the majority don't believe in Torah, but we know it's not the right way to be. So majority being in one mindset doesn't make it right. How many of you heard your parents say to you, so if everybody were to jump off a bridge, you'd jump off a bridge? Of course, my son had told us, that's great, I'll jump off a bridge. He thinks it sounds fun. Now, we didn't tell him it's like 800 feet in the air and you're going to go splat on the water. But the thing is, if somebody's doing something dumb, do you have to do it too because they're doing it? No. But you also don't have to go around and convince everybody that because you're doing it dumb that you want them to do it too, so you feel better. Comparing the two fathers here. So in the other chapter in Matthew, we read about you speak from your Father in heaven. He'll give you the words when your intrinsic nature is matching his. But here we see it's the father of the devil is trying to get you to convince yourself where it doesn't need to be. He says, and because I speak the truth, you don't believe me. Because I speak the truth, you don't believe me. I guess we're going to have to end there because it's already after over an hour here on this thing. We got a whole lot more to cover here. I hope that this is starting to make some sense. I think that if we can embrace this, it can really start to make some powerful changes in our lives. And we've got a ton more to go into here. Okay, we're just scratching the surface, so be patient. Avinu Malkeinu, our Father, our King. You truly are desired by us to be our Father. We want to embrace your fullness of your intrinsic nature, the nature of Elohim. Just like Yeshua fully embodied your nature, we want to embody your nature. We want to be like you in mind, in action, in thought, in belief, in understanding, so that we are pleasing in your sight. Father, we need your help and encouragement in this because we are battling and struggling always against the other two voices, struggling and battling against that self-sovereign voice and Hasatan's influences. Father, help us to truly embrace and to put into our being your nature so it chases all the other stuff away. So it chases it all away. So, Father, we come to you seeking, appealing to you, just asking for your mercy and compassion that you would just pour forth more and more upon us of your spirit, of your nature, so that we can be pleasing in your sight. Father, we thank you. We praise you. We come to you under authority because we know that Yeshua spoke the truth. We know that he is the truth, and it's in his authority that we come before you, seeking and asking and pleading. In his name we pray. Amen ve'amen.